Remember how in lockdown, people were reporting that their perception of time was all screwy? People were saying some pretty interesting stuff. Some were saying time felt like it was moving fast and slow at the same time. Others said they felt like they had too much time on their hands whilst simultaneously feeling like they had no time to do anything at all. There were even some who felt like they weren't spending their time correctly, who expressed notions of wishing they could rewind or stop time to utilize those hours more effectively. While we know time's arrow marches ever onward, we also know that time is somewhat of a social construct, especially in how we perceive it. I've been playing a game called Beacon Pines lately, and there's this whole conceit about going backwards and forwards in time, finding the right words to say or the right words to inspire your actions, so you can avoid misunderstanding and even disaster. And it got me thinking about how almost everyone wishes they could go back in time to one specific point, so they could say the right thing, do the right thing, so they could hold their tongue to remove the words they spoke from existing, to erase regret, or if not to erase regret, to be truly open and truthful about who they were when they weren't living authentically. And in Beacon Pines, this idea of correcting the timeline, of experiencing time in a non-linear fashion, are intertwined. I think for queer people, this hits differently, and for disabled people too. There's essays, articles, and discussions about what we call queer time and Crip Time, and I even want to talk about what I personally deem as Furry Time. Let's talk about it while I muse about Beacon Pines. But first, what do you think of when you think of adulthood? Moving out, getting married, having children, owning a house? Ironically, there is no real set-in-stone criteria other than reaching a certain age set. But what age constitutes maturity? Every culture and every country judges the passing of time by different meter sticks, and regardless of culture and country, queer and disabled people almost never measure up. It's not because we are actually behind, it's that we're perceived as being behind. It's because we're experiencing the effects of what is called chrononormativity. But what is chrononormativity exactly? To put it simply, it is, quote, the expectation that we all follow the same timeline, that there's the same right thing at the right time for everybody, unquote. But the reason queer people feel the effects of chrononormativity more acutely isn't because we are actively pushing away societal expectations or because we're rebelling against the status quo, as might be assumed. That happens too, sure, but more often than not, it's because by nature, we do not fit within the narrow confines of what majority groups dictate as normal. Catherine Bond Stockton, a literary gender scholar, states that, and I am paraphrasing here, the ways in which we societally understand growth is largely inaccessible to queer kids. Maturation is expected to be this legible, linear thing, but when we as queer kids have no framework in which to understand ourselves and grow in a way that makes sense for who we are until we reach adulthood, we essentially float through crucial developmental eras in a ghost-like fashion. We weren't authentically able to be present for ourselves in the way that is often afforded to straight, able-bodied, cisgender kids. I know personally that as an asexual biromantic and gender-fluid kid, I had no words or ways to explain the things I was feeling. And reaching out and trying to talk about it left me the strange and quirky one. The adults around me, and even my fellow kids, were all pushing this really specific narrative, and everything I said or did that was outside of the status quo was recontextualized into an experience that wasn't mine to claim. I could say, I'm a boy sometimes, and I'd get back, oh, you're a tomboy trying to be cool and not like other girls. Or I could say, I have a crush on this girl, and I'd get, aw, that's so cute. You're in that phase girls go through where you're so close to other girls that you think you can date them instead. But you'll grow out of it. Or conversely, I could say, I think sex is weird and I really don't think I'd ever want to do that. And I'd get, you will when you're older. You're a late bloomer. Who I was and who I am was always painfully being shoved into the narrow confines of a mold that wasn't made for me. I didn't fit. How was I supposed to bloom and come into my own when I was being forcibly pushed like putty into the mold of someone I never was, of someone I never would be? For a lot of us, especially those of us who are on the asexual and or aromantic spectrum, we are often perceived as being behind or even childish, regardless of age or experience, because these arbitrary markers of adulthood often don't apply to us. If we go with the unfortunately popular framework, for example, that developing an interest in sex marks our ascent into adulthood, that leaves a large amount of asexuals unable to ever measure up. If we go with the framework of dating, marrying someone, and having kids, then aromantic people who have no interest in these things are unable to measure up either. And as for owning a home, queer people experience homelessness at a much higher rate than our cis-het peers. And if not homelessness, unable to move out of their family home or living dangerously close to the poverty line. And many LGBT+ initiatives that aim to tackle these issues don't offer help to asexual people. Or they might, but we aren't listed on their about page of who they serve in the community. So we're left unsure if we'd be welcomed or if we're even cared about in the first place. So even within our own community, it's easier to fall through the cracks. This is a story about struggle. Or is it? In Beacon Pines, there's what they call turning points. They're exactly what they sound like, actually. These are points in time where your words and actions will change the course of the characters' lives. And if you run into a dead end, sometimes quite literally, you can go back and try different words. And whenever you restart, you get to recontextualize what the story is about. But in real life, without the ability to restart, we often forget that we do have the power to recontextualize our situations, to look at our own stories under a different lens, regardless of our very apparent lack of time travel abilities. Luca, our main character, and his friends all have ways in which they break the mold, where they don't fit in. Luca, for example, is unlike other children in that his parents aren't present, yet he still lives in his childhood home, surrounded by the ghosts of what was and never would be. Rolo, his best friend and ride or die, has a family, but is awkward and struggles to fit in. He's more invested in his sci-fi comics and fortifying his and Luca's secret hideout more than he is in being a normal kid. He is essentially the black sheep of his family despite, well, being a tiger. And Beck, who, despite maybe not being queer herself, experiences her own unique form of queer time, in the sense that she has two mothers, one who is more invested in the origins of Beacon Pines as a town, and the other who is more invested in the future of it. There is a constant push-pull in her household, and in this game of tug-of-war, sometimes the rope begins to fray in the middle, leaving the pressure of maintaining peace all on little Beck's shoulders. All of them, in their own ways, are pretty clear examples, at least to me, of how even the average person can fail to measure up to these arbitrarily imposed timelines. That's the thing about chrononormativity. It hurts everyone to some extent, and these characters, they all express how that makes them feel, how they want to be free. There's this one really impactful scene that stuck out to me, where Luca and Beck scream their anxieties and frustrations into the storm from Beck's window, so the winds can take them away, or as Luca calls it, registering their complaints with the storm. The second time I acutely experienced the weight of chrononormativity was when I became disabled long into my adulthood. I was stuck inside in debilitating pain, unable to function while the world kept on turning. And I was spiraling through the nightmare that was the deterioration of my health, being poked and prodded at by uncaring doctors and nurses, being medically gaslit, having no social life. I started feeling like I was behind, like everyone else was marching forward alongside time's arrow while I was stuck. This is what we call Crip Time. Crip Time is defined by the ways in which we as disabled people navigate the world in relation to the lack of accessibility around us. Crip Time indicates the complexity of disabled experience in a world with many barriers to accessibility. It indicates the need for extra time and the need for accommodations. Things others may be able to do by themselves swiftly and without assistance can take longer for us even with the help of loved ones or caretakers. Hell, even strangers. While we are all on the same journey that is life, disabled people are advancing at a different pace. And that's because Crip Time is naturally in conflict with quote-unquote normative time. We have to segment the time we spend in our days into what we can or cannot handle on that day, or, as many of us like to call it, rationing our spoons. I think this is the part where the average able-bodied person stops thinking about disability. They get to this part of the disabled experience and then they tap out. How terrible, they might say, as they shake their head, heart full of pity. And then they try to not think about the fact that disability comes for us all with age. And if it's not with age, anyone can become disabled at any time due to an accident, contracting an infection, developing an illness, the list goes on. They tuck it away into the dark recesses of their mind where they shove a myriad of uncomfortable topics such as death and what comes after, if there's anything at all. And of course, shoved even deeper into the darkest, deepest recesses, people who talk in movie theaters. Monsters, I tell you, monsters! But if you stick with it, and you don't abandon the thought, and you embrace Crip Time instead of pity, there is liberation to be found. This is a story about change. Not following the arbitrary timeline that is set out for us by normative thinkers is freeing for anyone. In fact, I'd even say it's essential. We can reclaim the experience of time and learn to celebrate that there is no step-by-step guidebook that we should be living by. You are not behind. You are simply on your own timeline that makes sense for you. Our time and how we spend it is directly related to our unique physical and cognitive makeup. And how we experience the time we have on this earth is how we choose to reframe it in our minds. Crip Time embraces this by acknowledging that this is a step in the right direction. Disabled liberation and our relation to accessibility, or lack thereof, are intertwined. I think disability theorist Alison Kafer summed the concept up pretty well when she said the following, quote, "Rather than bend disabled bodies and minds to meet the clock, Crip Time bends the clock to meet disabled bodies and minds." Both Queer Time and Crip Time emphasize that normative time is artificial and can be changed by recontextualizing it. But deprogramming ourselves of the values instilled in us since day one from normative society isn't that easy. And that's why change is painful, or at least it can be. Throughout Beacon Pines, different characters at different points are known to exclaim this. Change is painful, they say. But whenever the characters say this, I can't help but be reminded of an adage I learned a while ago that I think of fairly frequently these days. At the risk of being trite, I'd like to share it. Okay, trite mode activated. Let's go. When it's finally time for a butterfly to emerge from its cocoon, the process isn't always pretty. They strain and struggle, scraping against the confines of what was once its home. Its protective shell, if you will. It can be painful and awkward, and to an onlooker watching, it seems kind of agonizing. One might be tempted to help them out, to cut them free so it can make it out without too much damage. But the thing is, if you do that, that butterfly will be robbed of the chance to gain the strength it needed to fortify its wings. It would never fly. The struggle, the painful scraping of their newly formed wings against the ill-fitting cocoon is necessary for it to reach its final form and for it to thrive in it. Yes, change can be painful, but it's worth it. When I think of who I was as a kid, feeling like I was being stuffed into a mold that wasn't made for me, I remember this. I don't want to romanticize pain or trauma by any stretch of the imagination, but I would like to highlight that to grow as people, we sometimes have to make the hard choices. We have to get uncomfortable. We have to look inward and work on ourselves, find out who the fuck we really are and who we want to be, so we can break out and really start to experience what life has to offer. It can be a struggle, it can be agonizing, but it's better than choosing to stay inside of that mold we were shoved into against our will. You owe it to yourself to become your most evolved form. And you know who truly gets this and puts it into practice every single day? Furries. I'm serious, furries know what's up. During the pandemic, when I was newly ill, I started to really delve into furry content. Dance competitions like Floor Wars, public fursuiting for the kids, stuff like that. And in a way, it was more inspiring than any self-help book ever was to me. Furries really, truly know that there is no age limit for fun and being yourself, and love to inspire each other and those around them to really embrace their hobbies and every aspect of themselves, to keep using their creativity and imagination to really live it up, regardless of what normative society thinks of them or tells them, and to challenge each other to change and grow whilst holding and protecting a safe space for each other to do so. I remember one thing that really stuck out to me while watching Floor Wars in particular is the dancers were fronting on each other and challenging each other and really battling it out and working up a sweat. But regardless of the outcome of the dance battle, everyone always hugged each other at the end. And not like those awkward half hugs some people give either. No, these guys were straight up holding each other close, looking each other in the eyes, and really showing true appreciation for each other, even if they had never met before their dance battle. With these guys, just showing up and doing your best is enough. Sometimes the journey is more important than the outcome. The mentality is very much like, you showed up and danced your ass off, shared your art in front of hundreds of people. Isn't that incredible? And it's not lost on me that the furry community is a majority queer community. These guys have been aware of queer time and have been actively redefining their experiences in a lens that makes sense for them successfully for decades. I've always liked stories with anthropomorphic animals like Sly Cooper, Star Fox, and most recently, Beastars, the bad guys, Blades of Furry, and yes, Beacon Pines. But I was always hesitant to call myself a furry because I had heard so much from others about how weird and bad furries were, not to mention all the misconceptions. There's still a ton of people out there that think being a furry means you're sexually attracted to animal characters, and no, that's not what it means. I'll put some resources in my description box with my sources in case you want to learn more. But now, after seeing for myself who and what furries stand for, I am proud to call myself one. Series like Beastars have genuinely changed my life for the better. And Beacon Pines isn't the only furry story that actively deals with time, how we traverse through it and outside of it, and our perception of it. There's Cobalt Core, for example, a sci-fi roguelike deck builder where the characters are fighting for their lives whilst trying to figure out why they're trapped in a timeline that is looping. And Fuga, Melodies of Steel, a fantasy RPG where you play as a group of kids trying to survive in a war-torn country by co-piloting a giant tank they found, where at different points in the story, there is a time travel element centered around the sacrifices you make. All that to say, if Queer Time and Crip Time are constructs we can use to understand how and why we experience time differently, Furry Time is an exercise in how to utilize our freedom outside of normative conventional thought, how to have community and a sense of love for each other. If we can't go back to turning points and change the course of our own history, we can learn from Queer Time, Crip Time, and Furry Time that there is power in imagination, in shirking off the chains of normative thinking and perceptions of our time here on Earth, to make it our own. One of my favorite things about Beacon Pines is that it truly understands the importance of exploratory thinking in favor of emotional growth. As I mentioned earlier, Luca, our main character, is a 12-year-old deer boy who has lost his father and his mother, one to death and one is missing. His father, who passed away when he was 6, is still there for him in Luca's memories. The empty chair overtaken by moss and greenery by the lake where they used to fish is a place where Luca can meditate on their time together, to mentally revisit it whilst also reimagining their fishing trips in abstract ways. While I don't recommend dwelling on the past, especially not the traumatic parts, I think it's important to remember that the good memories are there to be remembered, and that we can revisit them at any time and meditate on them. And even if it's not a memory, it is completely within our power to create and envision scenarios that empower us. To imagine a future for ourselves where we can live freely, or to imagine that you could go back and be there for you as a child when no one else stood up for you. Without you, there is no story. We are the central figure in our lived history. Just as the player of Beacon Pines is both the reader of the storybook that encapsulates its bright and colorful characters, we also play Luca himself. We are both an active participant and an observer. We are, in our lives, the butterfly and the watcher, with the ability to take the easy way out with less growth, or to sit back and allow ourselves to get messy. To ugly cry, to change, to evolve, to be observant and pay attention to our surroundings. Learn from our experiences and from those around us and discover the tools needed to navigate life. We may not be able to go backwards in time like Luca, but we will have other chances to do right, to say the right thing, and to authentically take up space as our true selves. We create new branches every day of new possibilities in our own personal narrative, and with each branch, a new reality. We only need to draw from our experiences to step onto a new branch, a new path. So if we get to choose our own story and apply our own meaning to it, I've got just one question for you. What is your story going to be about? Thank you so much for watching. If you watched the whole thing start to finish and made it to the part where I ramble, well, you, my guy, are a real one. I'll be honest, writing this video was really hard for me. I felt like I was writing in a haze. I'm currently grieving the loss of a loved one, recovering from a health scare that resulted in a hospital visit, and struggling through some other really difficult stuff. But I feel like making this anyway was worth it. And hopefully you feel that way too. One can dream. I hope you'll check out Beacon Pines if it interests you. It's such a beautiful little game about love, loss, grief, and time, and how the ways we spend it matters. It's so worth it. If any of you pick it up or have already played it, please share your experiences in the comments below. I'd love to hear about it. If you enjoyed the video in any way, feel free to like and subscribe, but no pressure. We believe in free choice around here. If you're new here, hi, I'm DarkTeaTime, my pronouns are they, them, and I'm a purple sparkly goblin from the Sparkle Dimension. I do videos about asexuality, queerness, disability, and chronic illness through the lens of fiction and pop culture, so if that's your jam, I'd love for you to stick around and join the crew. We have a really great community here. If you feel so inclined, you can kindly tip me over on Ko-fi. I am not monetized yet, so any support is greatly appreciated. I also do sensitivity reading and consultancy over there as well, so if you'd like my input on a project you're working on, I'd be happy to help you out. Alright, ramble time over, folks. Take care, be nice to each other, and remember, your story is yours to define, no one else's. Bye, everyone.